What's going on, everybody? This is Owen from Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast. The podcast is back, and for the first time, you can see us in person live here recording. We're not actually live, but we do have the ability to do live recordings, so that may come in the future. Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast is back. We are very excited to bring you today's episode. This is episode number 35. The podcast has been away for a while, so for all you loyal listeners out there or first-time listeners, we thank you for tuning in to today's show. We hope to kind of keep this going and get more of a steady release schedule going, but this is the first episode of 2025, and we hope to keep a consistent schedule. So if you have any ideas that you want to send into the show or anything you want us to cover, we are working to get ways for you to reach out to us, but we do have an Instagram page, Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast, up, so you can go ahead and send DMs there for any ideas that you want us to cover. In the meantime, today's topic, we are talking about a band that I've had somewhat of a complex relationship with, a band that I've come to, I've grown from not really liking that band to they were my number one artist last year on Spotify. So I've felt a wide array of emotions about this band. I am talking about Tool for the audience out there. We are specifically talking about Tool's second album, Ænima, which I have here, all of it in its glory. One of the many albums in my record collection. Maybe someday we'll do an episode where I just go through my record collection. But today we are talking about Tool's second album, Ænima. This is released in 1996. So, for the first time on the video version of Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast, let me introduce my co-host today, Jaxon. Jaxon, welcome to the pod. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm great. Happy to be back. I'm a big fan of the podcast, the biggest fan, probably. And yeah, I'm honored to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you back. As we talked about in the intro there, we're talking about Tool today. We're talking about Tool's second album. Before we talk about the album specifically, Tool as a band, are you a fan? What is your kind of relationship like with Tool? Go ahead and just share whatever thoughts you have.
Yeah. Well, of course I'm a fan. I probably wouldn't be here if I wasn't. But yeah, I really like Tool. And I have, similar to you, they were to me early in my life, and I really don't got to like them more. And I think that just comes maybe with understanding. My first Tool experience, or the first time I ever heard them, was on Guitar Hero World Tour, which back in the day, that was like one of the only licensed things to use Tool music. They were very big on only physical music, and you like could not find their music online or download it online or anything like that. And nothing was licensed to use it, like except for this game. And they had Vicarious and Schism and Parabola on there, and those were the first songs I ever heard of them. And they even had like a level that was specific to Tool, and it had like very Tool like psychedelic looking art. Instead of seeing your characters, you would see the art change. I always thought, okay, these songs are super long. What the hell is this type of thing? But as I would play through the set list, I grew to like Vicarious a lot, and that was like in my intro. Later in life, I, I saw that I have some friends that we kind of jam sometimes. One of them plays bass, and he kept playing the intro to the pot, like just in between when we were jamming. I'm like, okay, what is that? He was like, oh, it's this Tool song. And I started listening to that. Like really even more into Tool and started listening to that. Yeah, I'm a fan, like Ænima a lot. Yeah.
Shout out Guitar Hero for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Definitely, I
Yeah.
remember, to piggyback kind of on what you said there. First getting a Spotify account set up. This was probably maybe 10 years ago, and streaming was kind of starting to take off in terms of like platforms like Spotify and things like that. They were starting to grow more, but there were still some artists that were kind of weary and they didn't have their full catalogs out there. At the time, I wasn't a Tool fan, but I want to say Tool was one of those artists.
Yeah. I remember the day, I think it was probably like 2019, maybe like 2020, somewhere around there. I remember the day that they like finally got added, and it was like actually like a pretty big deal. Like, holy shit, like you can stream Tool music now on Spotify, and that was a big deal.
Yeah, I would imagine that was probably around when Fear Inoculum came out, because that came out around
Yeah.
2019. So I would bet that's kind of related to that. But we're not here to talk about Fear Inoculum today, although I will say my process, I've talked about this before, my process for listening to albums, I like to start at the first album of a band that I want to listen to. So I start at the first album of their catalog, and I work my way through their catalog, going album by album. And Tool's first album, its name escapes me at the moment, Undertow. I listened to Undertow, and I did not like it at all. I was like, what is this? I'm not a fan. And my Tool friend, I reached out to him. I was like, dude, I don't really know about this. I didn't really feel it. And he was like, yeah, the first album's, it's a little, it's not their best, whatever, but you should give it a try. And I want to say, I don't have the exact timeline here, but I went maybe a year plus before I decided to, okay, let's revisit Tool. And that's when I listened to Ænima. But before even deciding to give Tool a chance and listen to them, for one reason or another, I had just said, I don't really like Tool. I'm not a Tool guy. I don't really want to listen to them, yada, yada, yada. And I think a lot of that stemmed from people who I knew listened to music. They had bad things to say about Tool for one reason or another. But when I gave them a chance, when I finally decided for myself that I was going to listen to them and try them out, I found that I really enjoyed what I was hearing. I want to say my first listen through Ænima, there were a few songs I liked. I sort of picked out, but something about it just kept drawing me back. And each time I would find I like this song, or it's just kind of took maybe not the first listen, but 2 or 3 listens in. Some of these songs start to settle in, and then you start to just keep listening to them more and more, and then you find yourself eventually just the album's firmly in your repertoire. It's a solid piece of your listening, and yeah, so to talk about the album as a whole, as a whole body piece of work, like we said at the top, this is the Tool's second album. This came out in 1996, sort of like you've talked about with the artwork, like kind of psychedelic almost effect of what they're trying musically and what they're sort of pushing. And there's some unique creative ideas that I think is really interesting here. This is the first album to feature bassist Justin Chancellor. He is not the original bassist, but I think from my experience listening to the Tool, the bass drives a lot of the sound, and I think it's very prevalent in their mixing. The album debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200. So pretty impressive for an album of this genre to be that high in the top album charts, which that is what the Billboard 200 is, for those unfamiliar. In 2003, the Recording Industry Association of America has certified this album as triple platinum. I'm not really sure how they factor in like streams of albums, how that counts as like a sale, but
Hmm.
that would be something interesting we could dive into in a future episode. And then Rolling Stone magazine, one last little fast fact about this album, they ranked this as number 18 on the 100 greatest metal albums of all time. So it's got a lot of claim to it. It's got a lot of recognition for it in the metal community. So focusing on Ænima specifically, in terms of looking at this album, in terms of where it fits in Tool's catalog, what are your thoughts overall without going too into detail on specific tracks, which we'll do here? The album as a whole compared to some of their other albums, which there's not a lot to choose from there. How do you feel about Ænima in Tool's body of work?
Yeah, I like Enema. I think it's a really cool album. It's not my personal favorite, but I see why for others it is. There are some great songs on it. I think a couple of their best Tool songs are actually from this album. Not my personal favorite, just but I wouldn't say it's like not one of their best. I know a lot of people say Live This is like their best album. Or a lot of people go to that album. I've heard some people also go to this album, which personally I would say like 10,000 Days is kind of where I stand, but I do like this album. This would probably be like my second, maybe, which is kind of crazy to like put Live This, like, I don't know. I just personally driven to listen to like this album and 10,000 Days more than this, I guess. It's
Right. So
personal preference.
just to kind of stay on that point, if you had to sort of think about why you're driven to maybe those two albums. I know we're talking Ænima today, but if we were to kind of look at Tool's body of work as a whole, what do you think it is about these 10,000 Days and Ænima that draws you to them as a listener? Maybe hard to answer, but
Yeah. I think I don't know if it's just this, like the style of some of the songs. 10,000 Days tends to be like more of their, like, it's like a sadder album. And I don't know if maybe it's the subject matter and it being a more depressing type of thing. I don't know. Like with this album too, I love this one is it can be very serious and then they start like making jokes too. Like I love how there's a balance there and there's like innuendos for like sex jokes and things like that, but then like there's also like super serious like dark stuff going on too. So I don't
yeah.
know if it's like the subject matter and Lateralis kind of being more of a spiritual type of thing, where I think he dives into that a little bit more on that album, where this one is a little more maybe yeah experience. I don't know. I mean, it's just really. I think it also comes down to the songs. There's so many preferences towards.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that kind of connection between like almost like a dark comedy sort of
Hmm.
where there's comedic vibes, but there's also maybe more heavier subject matter, kind of veering off track a little bit. I think specifically like 10,000 Days, where with a track like Vicarious, where the lyrics kind of refer to the amount of death that we see and how where we see so much of it through television and whatnot, live this vicarious experience of tragedy. And then you have a song like Rosetta Stoned, where it's like, what the hell
Yeah,
is going on here?
yeah,
And to bring it back to Enema, this album is dedicated to comedian Bill Hicks, who I'm not really familiar with, but there's some of that comedy element. But I think he was sort of, if my understanding is correct here, it was sort of a driver of that. So he had that sort of similar dark comedy aspect to him. And I think the band just had a relationship with him. They felt sort of maybe they were similar in terms of their creative approach. And even in the track that closes out the album, Third Eye, that sort of comedy club intro we hear at the beginning, I believe that is Bill Hicks performing. So kind of shed some light on the connections there between the comedy side, but also the darker side. It presents that throughout the album here. So to sort of bring up what you were talking about in specific tracks that you're drawn to on this album, let's sort of start talking about specific songs because, after all, what is an album if not a collection of songs? So, to get into it off the bat, before when you're releasing an album, when a band's releasing an album, typically there are going to be singles that come out. When this album was released, there were three singles. There was Stinkfist, H, and Enema. So we can kind of talk about the three singles and then maybe dive into extra tracks that we didn't touch on out of those three that we feel like mentioning. So Stinkfist also opens up the album. So that was
yeah.
released as a single on October 11th, 1996. That song is interesting to say the least. There was and MTV, they would not, when they aired the music video, they would not include the track because it was a little too, I don't know what the word is, but it wasn't fit for the airwaves. So they would just
Yeah.
call it one when it was aired on MTV. I know some of the MTV DJs, they would like shake their fist over their nose, like their fist stunk. So talking about MTV, back when MTV used to play music videos and not just reruns of ridiculousness every day of the week, MTV, music television, they would play the music video. Now, the music video for Stinkfist, I don't typically watch the music video, I don't pay much mind to it, but I know that you have some thoughts on the music video, and I know you've shown it to me before. So Do you have any thoughts you'd like to share here today about the Stinkfist music video?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think Stinkfist is it's like one of my favorite Tool songs.
Hmm.
I don't know particularly, I don't know why it's one of my favorites, but I think it's like a really cool opening to the album.
Yes.
And yeah, it's like one of my favorite Tool songs. The music video is so cool. I think Tool has some of the best music videos out there. I don't really know. Maybe in like kind of metal in the metal or like heavier music kind of world or what people consider that. I think they have some of the coolest music videos because they're very art driven and they're very strange and they're not like the band playing in a warehouse or the band playing in like a forest. It's all like very symbolic and it just is super strange. This one isn't like a lot of the time they will do claymation type stuff, and this one uses a lot more of like real people
Hmm.
dressed up, and I couldn't even really tell you like what to make of what you're seeing, but it's like super just strange and intriguing. So yeah, I can't even explain. Like I can picture like the big dude sitting in this room. There's like this big
Yeah.
weird guy that's like all painted up and yeah, it's a super weird music video. But I think it's like to play that on TV, I could see, why they would play something like that because it's super artsy, but it's so weird that they wouldn't have the track. And I can start to kind of guess why because I know Maynard has said it's not about sex, but it really sounds like it's about sex.
Well, I think this is a song. I think I like that. Now, I'm not someone who could write a biography on Tool, who could write a biography on Maynard James Keenan. I couldn't do that stuff. I'm just a guy who scribbled down some notes about this album in a notebook and have listened to it a couple times and like the way it sounds. So, my understanding is I don't think that Tool often likes to attach meaning to their songs. I think they like to leave that up to the listener.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah, because I think it's when we experience this, we kind of have our own takes and feelings that you feel, and that's part of the beauty of music. So I think that for me, Stinkfist, obviously, it seems to reference, fisting.
Yeah.
And that's I think why many people make that connection to sex. To me, I get sort of the vibe that it's about addiction.
Yeah, which I think is like what he was going for.
Right.
Whereas it almost sounds like sex addiction,
Right.
but yeah, I think it very much is, yeah, more just general addiction.
Yeah. And I think lyrically, we can see that when, refer to things like nothing seems to satisfy, I don't want it, I just need it. It's this need that sort of an addict would feel. Now,
Yeah, but I think it's like a dopamine too. Like I think everyone can has had something in their life where
right.
they get this dopamine rush and they start to kind of get this addiction of like wanting to constantly do it's like the constant like it's like the chasing the dragon mentality of like drugs, I think, where they're trying to like keep kind of pushing how far they can go and
Right.
even yeah like certain other things that aren't maybe chemically addicting in life but you get dopamine from. I think people can relate.
Yeah. Definitely. I like the track. I like the opening. I like those. I've seen like Danny Carey play that live where it's like I think they call them like Mandela pads or Mandala pads, and he's
Mhm.
it's like that floating sort of sound. It's really unique. And then it's sort of just like a lot of Tool songs. It starts off kind of spread out, maybe pieced apart, and it sort of builds up and comes together throughout the track. So definitely an interesting start to the album, and definitely make a good single.
Mhm.
It's definitely worth checking out if you're not familiar with this album and you're just looking for something to listen to. So going back to the singles from this album, well, actually, forget the singles because something two albums also do. I think they really nail the experience of listening to an album where the songs connect together. And one thing
Yeah.
Ænima really does well is it transitions into eulogy like perfectly. I don't know what that little like noise is at the beginning of eulogy, but it's sick. And
Yeah, absolutely.
the drum part off the top of eulogy is sick. And then the voice like mods or whatever he's doing there, that's really cool.
I know. I'm like half the time when I listen to Stinkfist, I like it's one of those things where I want to then listen to Eulogy after it.
Yeah, it's
And
like
it's
you.
just that intro is so sick and the build up. Like it's such a long build, but I don't think you get bored in it. Like it keeps you entertained and you're like want to keep hearing where the song is going.
Right. I would agree definitely with that. I think that that whole sort of build up we hear and how it's like quiet and then it's a crescendo of feelings. I think the drums sound great on it. Obviously, we haven't touched on Danny Carey's presence in Tool a ton, but he's regarded as one of the great drummers of our time. I think he's an incredibly
Absolutely.
talented drummer. Now, I'm not a drummer myself, but
Yes, you are.
I don't consider myself that much of a drummer, but I definitely respect his ability. But talking about sort of focusing on what the song is about, we sort of have this character who's maybe no longer with us and he has to sort of hear the thoughts of people who are eulogizing him, who are speaking on who he was. Maybe there's a message in there of, you know, you have to, it's your responsibility to set how you're remembered throughout
Yeah.
life as you're living it. So the interesting thing is we talked about how Bill Hicks was like an influence on this album, and I was wondering because he died 2 years prior, and I almost wonder if this is about him maybe in some sort of way.
I think it's about martyrs in general, kind of. I think because I've heard people try to put a name to who the song is talking about. And as you said, they're very ambiguous. Some of my favorite bands are ambiguous, and I think that that is like almost one of the best, the safest routes you can go for writing music, at least lyrically, because the audience almost gets the ability to attach their own feelings to that song. But I think it's like kind of martyrs in general, and like yeah, people's legacies are left, and it's something along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And I think stepping away from the lyrics, this is another great track where it like really builds toward the end and it's like
Hmm.
overwhelming almost in its sound. And then we drop out and we flow into the next track, which was released as the second single, which is interestingly enough was released as a single after the album came out. The album was released September of 96 and H was released as a single in March of 97. So it's almost like they were trying to maybe promote the album more, promote them as a band more. But H has a really cool opening with that bass. We talk about the impact of the bass in Tool. You definitely feel that in your chest almost when you're opening
Yeah.
up. It's got that dark sort of feeling to it, especially. So, you know, it's also another one where we kind of build up and we sort of have this whole flow that is consistent through these first three tracks where we transition from this sort of spread out, pieced apart, and then it sort of comes together and rises up. I feel like I'm just sort of just
Well, yeah, I think so. Age is interesting. You know, I did some like some background in looking at some of the lyrics before we jumped on here and
mhm.
looking at that a little more. I think and I didn't know this until like looking into it more. It seemed like it was about like prior to knowing this for me, it seemed like it was about confronting like parts of yourself type of thing. Like it seemed like it was something along those lines and like seeing reflections and like confronting these like parts and those parts of you dying. I think it's actually about his son and like trying to raise his son and being scared of like he doesn't want his son to turn out like him, and or at least the ways that he doesn't want like the bad things about him to then also be kind of in that. And that's just what I've heard other people say, like kind of analyzing the lyrics a little more. But I can see that a lot see it. And I think H is like maybe the middle initial or something of his son or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think it's about like almost parent.
Well, that's certainly a theme I cannot relate to. But
I know, yeah. It's, we don't have kids, but
we don't have kids, but I think that's definitely, as a writer, I'm not a writer. I'm saying from Maynard's perspective, as a creative, you draw on your life experiences, and parenthood, I'm sure, is certainly an experience that he could draw on. So then we flow into another song that really has a great introduction. 46 and 2. Well, we have the intro, the interlude tracks. The interlude that leads into 46 and 2 is Useful Idiot. And that one's just like the record spinning. It's like the white noise, and it flows right into that bass intro that kicks off 46 and 2.
yeah.
Funny thing about that is, before I think this was part of the catalyst of what had led me to listen to Ænima. I was scrolling through Instagram Reels, as one does, and I this song was in a meme. I don't remember the specific meme, but I was like, "Whoa, this is interesting." And I Shazammed it, and I saw, "Whoa, this is Tool." And I think maybe a week later or 2 weeks later, or however the story went, I listened to the full album, and this was definitely one of the ones that stood out to me, because I think also what I like about it is, okay, so the first song, 5 minutes in length, that's not too long, but Eulogy's like 8 minutes, H is 6 minutes. It's kind of a lot to get used to when you're first adapting to sort of listening. When you're first listening to a band or an album that has lengthier tracks, you can sometimes become less engaged throughout. But I think 46 and 2, especially for a first time listen, is a good song that your ears can kind of hold on to. But surprisingly enough, it wasn't released as a single, despite its sort of, for me, digestibility. So I don't know if you have any sort
Yeah.
of thoughts on the album, on this track specifically.
Yeah, and this is like, again, a personal thought about singles and bands releasing songs. I really hate when all of the best songs on an album get released as singles. So I think it's cool to keep a couple that, and maybe they just didn't think that this one would be as crazy, as liked as it ended up being. But I like holding back some of the goodies for like the release, because it's such a bummer if you get to the album and they've released like, and this is a long album, luckily, but which some people like, some people don't, whatever. But like a shorter album that's maybe like 30 minutes instead of an hour. And if you've released three singles and they're all of the like best songs, and then everything else kind of feels like filler, like that sucks. So for this one to be held back, we weren't around for the release, but I think that's really cool. I respect that. I think the just kind of going back to the interlude, I
Yes.
think it is I'll listen to those the first three tracks, like from Stinkfist to like H, and I think the interlude is supposed to be almost like kind of a joke in a way of them
Right.
like faking out the end of the album,
Yeah.
and like then like going into the like just I think it's just maybe that's kind of part of it. But 46 and 2 again is like one of my favorite Tool songs. I think it just goes really hard, and like the way that when the chorus comes in, that intro is sick, and like when you get to the chorus, like this is a song I'll listen to a lot at the gym. Like,
Mhm.
you're just kind of like pumping weights, and you're hearing like the hit music, my shadow, and like it's,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
it's
like the
really cool.
flow. I like how it has that sort of just the flow to it, to where it's just that riff is just, it's like cycling, so it's like you can just sort of have it in the background while you're doing whatever you're doing, whether it's pumping iron or just driving, or whatever. I think it keeps you moving to where it's not sitting
Mhm.
still too long. Yeah. So talking about the interlude tracks, I find that I sort of talked about how Tool strings things together to make the album a complete collection of songs rather than just a sort of salad of songs where it's just a bunch of different parts in a bowl. It's sort of a melting pot. But I think when I re listen to the album, I might skip the interlude tracks because
Yeah.
I want to get to what I want to hear. But at the same time, I think when I first listened to it, I liked what those contributed. And if you think about, okay, we're in the digital era now where we have streaming, but when Tool, when you have a vinyl or a CD, you almost don't even think about those as a separate track. It's just
Yeah.
because you're not, it's not transitioning to this separate track and something you can skip. It's just a continuation, and you don't even think about it almost. And
Hmm.
I think of them as sort of gluing together different parts of the album. So we have like these first three block of songs, which are really strong tracks on the album. And then we have Useful Idiot, and that sort of ties us into the next portion, which has 46 and 2, and then other songs that we'll get to. And then it sort of ties us into the end. And funny thing,
Yeah.
I think actually this is sort of dawning on me now that I'm looking at the album. And I think I read this in my notes, but I maybe didn't highlight it specifically. So we have side A of the album. It has Stinkfist, Eulogy, and H, and then it goes into Useful Idiot. And I think that is a joke, like you sort of said, to make it sound like the album's ending, like the needle is hitting the end of the album, and then you flip it over, and we're back into 46 and 2, and it kind of brings it back in. So I think what you said is exactly right. It's a joke track that it's like, oh, album's over, like you got to change your needle.
Yeah.
And I think I was listening to a track on Tom Petty's Greatest Hits where he has like a similar joke. Not where it's like static like the end of a record, but there's like an announcer who comes on is like, attention CD listeners, we are giving the vinyl listeners time to flip their albums over. Please wait. All right, we're going to continue now. And just stuff like that I think is interesting, and it's fun little things that an artist can do to keep it creative and just try something different. But 46 and 2, discovered it from a meme.
Yeah. It's hilarious how that, like in our generation nowadays with the internet and how big short videos are on TikTok and memes, like it's hilarious how it has made so many bands get much more popular if they go viral for some meme, and how people find music from just seeing some video online and liking the song and then getting into that song. Because I think we all do it now, where we see something and you like check it out because you saw a meme, and yeah, yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's hilarious.
definitely. I think is something that is, how we consume content. And a lot of bands, not saying this has happened with Tool specifically, but it's given them a boost in popularity for sure.
Hmm.
Because if it gets caught on a trend or whatever, it'll bring in new listeners, which then I guess all you can do at that point is hope, okay, they're going to listen to full albums and they're going to buy merch and they're going to go to concerts and they're going to spiral. But you got to start somewhere
Hmm.
from becoming a Tool fan. And speaking of talking about Tool fans as a whole, there's the song Hooker with a Penis, which I think is about, not I think, it is about Tool fans. This track is about people who view Tool as sellouts, which is
Yeah,
interesting, talking about people calling them a sellout on their second record. I think
I
that
know, like, yeah, it's crazy. Yeah,
it feels a
but
little early to be considered a sellout.
I know, and it's funny because like we don't have the context of like the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've thought that too. Like what? This is like to me like I'm sure there were like gatekeepers that wanted to keep these guys like underground, kind of not super popular, because you see that with every band. Yeah, it's like it's their second album and they're selling like what? Like I don't. I mean, I guess I just don't get it because I'm too young. But
And
yeah,
that
it's that's funny.
But I think it does kind of talk about, maybe not necessarily for Tool specifically, but from a band who's getting accused of selling out, it's like, okay, well, we can't sell out. You're only accusing us of selling out, but because there's people like you buying our stuff, and you just shut up with your complaints and buy our new record. Like we don't care. And I think it's just sort of, it's pushes this concept of, this pursuit of success in the music industry, and people just buying stuff, and really just overall consumerism in our
Hmm.
society, how everything's about selling, everything's about, having success, making money, selling your product. And even in a space that ideally, is about creativity and fostering that and growing that, the idea of getting accused of selling out or this line you have to walk of like, are we selling enough? Are we successful enough? Because it all comes down to the fat dirty dollar at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It's prevalent, and you know I like the track. It was interesting. It was interesting to see the title for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know what the title means. I'm not going to pretend to know what the title means, but I think lyrically, this is one of the more straightforward Tool songs too, where it's like,
Yeah. I almost think the title again is kind of a joke.
yeah,
I think it's just kind of like, oh, what do we call this song? Like, like, like they just are joking.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think too, we talked about like the crescendo that Tool has gradually throughout their songs. This one is crazy loud at the end, like it's like the speakers are crackling, stuff is breaking down, and then we get to the end and we sort of have this big sort of washout to finish out the song.
Yeah.
And then we have the fun little intermission track where it's like that little funky organ. And
The organ thing. Before you like dive into that, I do want to like say something about 46 and 2 because we didn't really talk about like what that song's about.
yeah, go ahead.
Like 46 and 2 being like I just think it's kind of interesting. And like again too, I had to like look into this more. Like I obviously knew the song was about like dealing with a part of yourself that you don't like your shadow. Like it's like dealing with
Mm-hmm.
the parts of yourself that you almost don't acknowledge. But 46 and 2, it's like how many chromosomes people have. So it's supposed to be about like I guess it's like acceptance of these pieces you don't like about yourself. And once you do that, like moving on in a way. I was thinking like we didn't really touch on that. So I wanted to say something about it.
Well,
But
yes. I mean, you're a valuable contributor of Owen's Rock and Metal podcast. So
thank
please,
you.
if you have things to say, like say them. Um, and that's interesting. The chromosome bit, I was unaware of, but that's
Yeah. Right. Well, like that's what I was like, what why is this like numbers? And it's not
yeah,
even numbers where it's like the actual like numerals, like it's spelled out 46 and then it's a like actual 2. So you're
right,
like, why is it like why is half of it not a number and then like I thought that was interesting
right.
enough to like look up and see like what it is. But yeah, then back to the narration of like the melody of Jimmy before you get to Jimmy.
Yeah. And Jimmy, has this sort of weird intro. I don't really know what instrumentation they're doing there, but I think Jimmy is, I think it's about Maynard's life. It talks about a dead Ohio sky. He's from Ohio, fun fact. Um, and I don't know if Jimmy was like a nickname, but his middle name is, or like, I don't know if that's a middle name or how that works, but Maynard James Keenan, a lot of people named James are called Jimmy for short.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I looked into
I
the significance of like 11, and
okay, so I didn't like this was obviously about somebody. My first time listening to this album, I thought it was about someone else, and then you kind of realize like it's about him,
Mhm.
the younger version of himself. From 10,000 Days, I knew because I looked into the meaning before. It's about his mother being paralyzed and like how many years she was paralyzed. And I think this is actually a precursor to the album that comes out. I think he's talking about his experience with his mother
Right.
being paralyzed. And actually, again, when I did some more research for the album, I knew, again, listening to it, it was about his younger self and his experiences. And just assuming his parents called him Jimmy, like, everybody has like parents give them pet names that only like their parents call them. I think that was one of them for him. But I think 11, from what I've seen, is it was his last year with his mother before she was paralyzed. And that's the significance of that age.
Yes, I see that now in my notes. It was continued on the second page, but yeah, that you said it all well. You hit the nail on the head. Had everything that I had touched on in my notes, and I think it just talks about this kind of trauma he had to deal with. And we talked about how creative people will use their outlets to touch on different things that are impacting them or feelings that they're feeling. And if this was a childhood trauma he felt, writing a song about it and including it in your lyrics can be a great way to discuss that and sort of work through that. So, it talks about lyrically the face of your own stability, which that would reference one's mother. Then that's leaving you dead and hopeless, and that's likely describing the feelings he's feeling when his mother does suffer this terrible accident. And 11 was when she was gone. She waved goodbye. That's sort of when things stood still, and he has to kind of work through this. And it was all in Ohio. So, Ohio, baby.
Ohio, baby. Yeah. Also, where Owen's Rock and Roll podcast is from.
Yeah, that's true. Shout out Ohio. But I like Jimmy. This one was one that I wasn't Erica was like, okay, this is just whatever. It didn't draw me in as much. I think it was maybe it's not like as riff heavy. It's sort of a lyrical spotlight, and it's like, okay, let's find something that's maybe a little more in your face or whatever. But we jump into the next track, which this is such a weird one.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
When I first heard this one, and it's Die Ihr von Slatten,
Yeah.
is German. Excuse any German mispronunciation, and shout out our German listeners. But
Yeah,
it's
didn't you say there was like one or something? Like somebody they checked it out.
I looked into it, and I think we have a few German listeners.
That's interesting.
This is years ago. Maybe we'll cover some Rammstein for them, but
Yeah.
you know, I haven't looked at the analytics for a while on this show because this show hasn't really done anything. So we'll see.
Yeah,
But
we're kind of talking in a void, you know.
yeah, so
Kidding.
you got to start somewhere. But this song, the title translates to the eggs of Satan, and I think this is another one where it shows their humor mixed in. We have this song Jimmy where it's about this boy who's we learn through some digging that it's this boy's mother has suffered this tragic accident, and he's having to process that and work through these feelings and whatnot. But then we transition to this song that sounds really serious and kind of scary, and it's like a Nazi rally or something, and it's really, what am I hearing right now? The Nazis
Yeah.
are the bad guys. I'm gonna make a hot take there. So it's like, why am I hearing the bad guys, sort of talking like this and hearing this on a record? And then you look into the lyrics, and it's like a recipe about baking something.
I think it's a weed recipe.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, so I've looked into it too. Like, unfortunately, like when Americans hear a angry German, we associate that with Nazis,
Right.
unfortunately, or like Hitler, just because that's, what we learn about and basically is kind of shoved at us. So unfortunate stereotype. But, so then I'm like, what is this? Is this it sounds like, some speech or something. And I looked it up and like, yeah, it's like a weed recipe or something, like, which is insane to put after a song about your paralyzed mother. Like that is like such a like that is like some dark humor stuff. Like, all right, let's throw this one in here. Yeah, they're fucking wild. I mean,
You
I don't
got to
know if
take
I should cuss on those. Sorry, excuse my French.
you can swear. We can just flag this as having explicit language when we post
Yes,
it.
yes,
But yeah, no, feel free to say what you need to say, but don't say anything that could hurt any potential sponsorships. We
yeah.
gotta
I'll keep that in mind.
rake in the
Yeah,
dollar bills.
yeah, yeah. Celsius, if you're out there, Owen's Rock and Metal podcast.
So, but I think you bring up an interesting point, how it's like this sort of, to a first listen, somebody who doesn't speak German, it highlights, or what do we associate the German language with? But I think it's also not just the German language and
It's not
oh,
even the
okay,
language. It's like just the
the
speech is
crowd noise, and it's like,
yeah,
I feel like I should be concerned about this.
yeah.
And then that goes into Push It, which this song, some people really like this song. Some people say it's their favorite Tool song. I think it's good. This is a longer one, I think. This is like 9 minutes. It's
Hmm.
almost 10 minutes long. So this is the second longest song on the album. But I think that this kind of touches on a potential humorous point. Is this whole album about shit? I mean,
No.
there's a lot of like,
It's,
there's a lot of poo like
well,
references.
right. Enema, like an enema is like you like putting something up someone's butt to like basically get them to like release,
Yes.
everything. But it's also like Latin for like soul or something. Like it's such a
Yeah.
funny like duo that they keep on. They're so spiritual and like they're talking about these crazy topics, especially as you get to the end, it starts to get more spiritual, but it's also like they're talking about shit. Like it's like they're making innuendos. I think it's really funny.
Well, and so if we kind of rewalk, like, okay, stink fist. Well, that's about fisting, you could say.
Right. Like an ass almost.
I don't have a great connection there, but eulogy here. Let's think about this. Eulogy is the end of your life, and poo is the end of food in
Well,
your body.
not only that, I mean, I guess you're right, but like you released yourself
When you
when you
die,
pass.
and H, what could that could be hemorrhoids. So
Yeah,
there's
that one's a
something
stretch,
there.
but
I don't have a lot for the next couple,
I
but then
don't know. I think they just sprinkle shit jokes in there,
we get to,
throughout
we get to push it, which when you're shitting, you're pushing it out. So is this album about shit? It might be. I think that this also highlights like the humor side of things
yeah,
that they're trying to
loosely,
hit on.
loosely about shit.
I think it's funny. I think it's, again, we talk about how they kind of like to leave that stuff kind of, if you catch it, it's open to interpretation. If that's what you think they're doing, then that's might be what they're doing.
Hmm.
I think it's funny, and I think it's, something that just kind of makes me laugh. Outside of the track "Push It," unless do you have anything else to add on this track?
Not really. I mean, it's for me, like you said, like some people love it. I don't know. I just tend to always go back to Stinkfist and 46 and 2 when I re-listen to it, or that and like Eulogy. Like, so those are my like go-tos off the album. This one isn't like super crazy to me, but I know some people love it.
Well, speaking of tracks people love, we're about to talk about my favorite track on the album, which is Enema. The title track is another Pooh reference, but it's the title,
Hmm.
so it's in there. But Enema, a note about this song though, it is spelled different from the album spelling. It's got that AE spelling, and then the album is Nima, and this is Anema. So I don't know what that's about, but this is pretty clear lyrically what it's about. His disdain for Los Angeles and sort of he's describing all these different people and how he has these really negative feelings towards them. And it's about, I don't know if it's specifically like the San Andreas fault line, but no, all these theories that California could just, this a major earthquake could trigger this fault line and it could slide into the ocean, or a lot of things could be destroyed out there. And I think this is maybe sort of like envisioning, not like it is envisioning that, it's describing that. And we talked briefly about Bill Hicks and being like a reference for that. And I think that he's an influence on this. I want to say he had a bit about this sort of thing happening. So that sort of flushing it all away, flushing it. I mean, is that another poo
I
joke?
know. Yeah.
What are we talking about here? But it's, interesting to the point where I think it's easy lyrically to follow with what he's saying, and sort of these, like, fuck these people with their, Botox and their cars and their hair and their agents and their scripts. Like fuck all these people who live out in LA who think they're more important than they are. And I think that's the message he's hitting at. And the whole
Hmm.
learn to swim thing is we're falling in the ocean, and you're gonna have to learn how to make it without these superficial LA society, whatever you want to call it, to prop you
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. And as a rising band, like they probably, I mean, you always think of like, you know, like I guess Hollywood and like LA and things like that, and production and a lot of that stuff being out there. I mean, they might have a closer tie to that. I don't know who or where, like who produces this, who records it. I'm sure they have problems with what can and can't go out there, and there's a lot of like control from the people over you for like any industry or whatever. So I don't know. There's that. But it's almost like yeah, there will be this like Mother Nature is gonna like cleanse this place, like and
Yes.
something. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that whole that point about Mother Nature sort of being the driving force of this, I think he's highlighting the sort of ugliness that LA represents from our society and culture, and how he's hoping for a balancing act that's going to sort of rectify whatever we've built out there. And he makes
Hmm.
makes a lot of references in it to different parts of the different pieces of LA. I've never been to LA, but that's my understand. That's sort of how a lot of people view it, I think.
Hmm.
So then we have, a real clunker of a track where it's just like electricity sounds and there's nothing really going on in it. And then we get to Third Eye, which when I first heard this one, I was like, this is a weird track. What is this? It's super long. It's what are we talking about? But I eventually adjusted to this song to where I really enjoyed it. I love like those laser beam effects that are in the middle where it's like a bolt of lightning's being thrown down. It just sounds really kind of like cinematic, and it's this big epic piece. And could this be another reference to shitting and poo? Third Eye, could it be referencing like your butthole? Maybe, but probably not. It's probably referencing a little more spiritual, but I think it could be taken that way if you're looking for shit jokes on the album, which I was
Yeah.
trying to do in my notes. And I think it's also kind of the comedy line at the top, which is highlighting more of Bill Hicks's influence, how it talks about drugs and using them to achieve a higher conscience, open up your third eye, which some say we all have. This track, well, how do you feel about it? Are you a fan? Is it something you listen to? Is it more?
The longer a song is, I think it's like not as easily accessible to people, and it's hard. But Tool, like that's their thing. Like they guys have long songs that like a hour long album. But it adds up. Yeah, it's not one that I come back to a lot. I mean, it's cool, and like you said, it has some cool like effects and like some interesting going on, like with that like kind of lightning type of sound.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. Like as somebody that doesn't dabble in any type of like drugs or anything like that, like I'm not really into that stuff. It seems like this is one of those like talking about a trip type of thing, which is an interesting like it's an interesting concept that I'm like kind of unfamiliar with, but like this blue thing that he's seeing and like I guess other people have seen and how it's like not his time to like see what's behind the curtain almost, and see kind of like how things are working. But I don't
Right.
know. It's interesting.
Yeah. It definitely kind of that sort of references like the third eye and this higher level of being that we're capable of, but only some people can achieve. But looking at kind
Hmm.
of the album art, we see there's like two pupils here, and it's kind of a third eye, and it doesn't really show well, but these are like more of those eyes. So it's sort of a overlying theme of the album, I think, that sort of spirituality and this higher plane of being. And I think they touch on that in some other albums, kind of similar to like Lateralis and this sort of continuum of human spirit and things like that. But to sort of put a bow on this album as a whole, for me, this album is one that sort of opened up the doorway for Tool. It allowed me to become more accepting of their music and really introduced me to some of some of their best songs, in my opinion. I really enjoy this album. I hold it dear, and I think I'm not sure how many of these songs. I want to say Stinkfist was my number one song for my Spotify Wrapped last year. So definitely took a their presence in my listening. But for you, now that we've kind of gone through, we've talked about points that we like to highlight. What are your sort of takeaways? What would you say to somebody you're sort of recommending this album to?
Yeah, I think 46 and 2 is like a huge Tool song. I think a lot of people, when they think of Tool, they think of that song. That and Lateralis, where like, two, like when you first think of them, you think of those songs. Yeah, Stinkfist is a great song. I think really like off of the album, 46 and 2 and Stinkfist are two very palatable, like just cool Tool songs that anybody could get into. And I think those are some big ones, and then once you dive in, if you like it and you get further into it and you listen to the album, then there's more to explore. But it's a pretty cool album. They have a lot of cool stuff. It explores a lot of different topics, but it's also very cohesive. It's dark, but it's funny. So there's just a lot of like things going on. There was a lot of thought that went into the album, concept wise and musically too. From, as you mentioned, like Danny Carey being like a great drummer, and I really like the bass. That's almost something that brought me into Tool. Is, like I said, that pop intro being played on bass. So like for this to be the first album with Justin as their bassist, that's a really cool thing to have. And then what is it, Adam Jones? Not to leave the guitars out. I mean, he's also cool. I mean, all the music. I mean, there's no convincing needed there that the music is it's intriguing and it's really good. Heavier metal music. But yeah, great. It's a great album. I think it's got some of their most iconic songs that are a great listen.
Definitely. I think that's why we spent an hour plus talking about it. So definitely recommend Tool. Ænima is a great place to start when checking out the album. So that's about all we've got for us today at Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast. This is the 35th episode of the show. Not sure what's going to come next from this, like we kind of touched on. I'm just happy to have an episode back and sort of, we got to start somewhere to get the ball rolling. So I think that this is a great place to do that. If we have no other words to say, we want to thank you all for tuning in and joining us here on Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast. And we'll be sure to catch you next time. And as always, never stop rocking.